those of you still looking for the perfect gift for your child or your grandchild, there's plenty, of course, from which you can choose. The hot toy list this year includes Supernova Battle Rover, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Stretch and Shout Leonardo. That's a mouthful. There's the Disney Frozen Snow Globe Elsa. Or how about the Minnie Mouse musical Touch and Crawl? There's still time to get the Nerf Mega Thunderbolt, or maybe even the Giggly Girls Twirl Table. Pretty amazing when you consider the selection from which one can choose these days. Speaking of gifts, is the old story of two brothers, young children, both of them, one a confirmed pessimist and the other a complete optimist. Father of these two boys tried in every possible way to equalize their natures, but to no avail. So when Christmas came along, he was very careful to purchase for the pessimistic one everything in the line of new toys. In the stocking of the optimistic one, though, he placed only a small horseshoe. Christmas morning arrived, and the pessimist looked wearily over his huge display of gifts provided for him, and he said gloomily, "What's the use? These toys will all be broken in a day or two." Shortly afterwards, the optimist arrived cheerfully at the tree, looked into his stocking, and lifting out a small horseshoe, enthusiastically said, "Santa brought me a pony. It's got to be around here somewhere." Now, many of you are aware that Time magazine names a person of the year every year. The recognition dates back way to 1927, when Charles Lindbergh became the first person to fly a plane, as we know, solo nonstop across the Atlantic from New York to Paris. He was Time magazine's first person of the year. The second one was Walter Chrysler, a Kansas native, born just east of here in Wamego, and grew up in Ellis, Kansas, who oversaw the merger of Chrysler and Dodge. Consider some of the other Person of the Year recipients. Franklin Roosevelt received the honor twice in 1932 and 34. Winston Churchill received the Distinguished Award twice in 1940 and 1949. Another Kansan, Dwight Eisenhower, received the honor 2 times in 44 and 1959. Person of the Year went to the U.S. scientist in 1960 for the meteoric rise of the country's space program. Polish Solidarity leader Lech Wałęsa was awarded the distinction in 1981 for his role in dismantling communism in Poland. Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, was a Person of the Year in 1999. New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani was a Person of the Year in 2001, right after 9/11, of course. And the American Soldier in 2003 was the Person or Persons of the Year for representing U.S. forces around the world. In 2005, the Good Samaritans, represented by U2's Bono and Bill and Melinda Gates, received a Person of the Year for their philanthropic efforts. Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg was the honoree in 2010. And the protester, representing many global protest movements across the globe, was considered consequential enough to earn distinction in 2011. And finally, this year, the Ebola fighters, the healthcare workers, the doctors, the nurses, the ambulance attendants, the burial parties, anybody who put their lives at risk were Time's Person or Persons of the Year. They were the ones who answered the call, said the magazine. One Ebola fighter, an ambulance driver from the African country of Monrovia, after contracting the disease himself and then being cured, to which he attributed to a miracle of God, he said, "I'm going back into their full swing. I'm going to fight Ebola with all my might. I'm going to go to every nook and cranny of the capital city and take them to treatment units and offer words of hope and encouragement." Person of the Year. What did Jesus say? I was sick, and you came to see me. Now, as I understand it, the Person of the Year honor is given to, normally, the people who, in the editor's minds, carry the most influence in the world. It could be good or bad. Joseph Stalin was given the distinction. 2 different years because of the amount of influence that he exerted on world affairs. But in combing through all the names on the list since 1927, I came up with only 4 people out of the 87 on the list for religious reasons. One was Ayatollah Khomeini, a Muslim, of course, who led the Iranian Revolution in 1979. Pope John the 18th. Pope John helped mediate the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. And then Pope John Paul II, who helped hasten the downfall of communism in Poland. And finally, Martin Luther King, the famed pastor, of course, who laid the groundwork for civil rights legislation. The only, interesting enough, the only Protestant Christian of the 4. Now, I'm not sure what this actually means or says. Perhaps, unlike industry or science or politics, matters of faith are sublime and subtle enough to create undercurrents of personal thought and conscience, and not always currents of innovation, reform, and revolution. And so all the religious leaders who earned the distinction of Person of the Year, in these cases, were ones who intervened on behalf of their faith to help alter the course of history. All but one, in their own way, were constructive innovators and reformers on behalf of the causes that they represented. The 2 popes, for instance, in defense of freedom and peace. And finally, Martin Luther King, a religious leader reminding his fellow Americans that all are created equal in the eyes of God, setting the stage for a dramatic shift in racial equality. Perhaps, if the word had been given earlier, Martin Luther would have been the magazine's Person of the Year in 1516 when he nailed the 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg, Germany, the initial catalyst for the Protestant Reformation. Let's go back 2,000 years ago to the miracle in Bethlehem. If there was a magazine recognizing the Person of the Year with the criteria used now, Caesar Augustus would have received the honor, I believe, hands down. Not necessarily for any noble reasons, but for reasons that he in the Roman Empire were the dominant force in the world. Later in Jesus' life, it would be Tiberius Caesar who would be at the top of the list for the Person of the Year. Rome, of course, did a lot of good with its expansion of economies and expansion of transportation and connecting people and commerce. But Rome did a lot of bad, as we know, with brutal crackdowns of anybody who dared to think differently. People were commonly punished or put to death for the slightest hint of resistance. In many ways, Rome was civilized. In more ways, Rome was uncivilized for its lack of respect for the sanctity of human life. But the magazine would have likely missed the consequence, I believe, of the miracle in Bethlehem. And it would likely have missed the irreversible message of hope and peace that the man Jesus Christ shared with thousands who listened. The magazine perhaps would have missed the drama of the cross, the miracle of the resurrection. And then it would have easily missed Jesus' challenge to the established order of his own religion and the promise of a new covenant which would turn the world's values upside down with love and forgiveness replacing hate and vengeance. Who would have ever guessed that the bookends of Jesus' life, his birth and his resurrection, with his magnanimous and miraculous ministry between those 2 bookends, would not only change the world as everybody knew and understood it, but if they announced today the person of the centuries, the person of all time, the person of the generations, even the most secular of judges would not deny the honor to Jesus Christ. It's a done deal. Nobody's even close. It's like the distance that separates the stars, that separates the galaxies from one another, that separates the earth from the sun. Nobody holds a candle to to the impact that Jesus had on humanity. As a writer wrote in One Solitary Life, the original one written almost 100 years ago, 19 long centuries have come and gone, and today Christ is the centerpiece of the human race and the leader of the column of progress. I am far within the mark when I say that all the armies that ever marched, all the navies that were ever built, all the parliaments that ever sat, all the kings that ever reigned, put together, have not affected the life of people upon this earth as powerfully as that one solitary life. But from a personal standpoint, none of this makes much difference unless this solitary life, the Savior Jesus Christ, has an effect on yours and my life and alters the way we operate on a day-to-day basis. It was the case with a young man who I visited with about a year ago. He had recently graduated from Kansas State. He grew up in Missouri. He did exceedingly well in school here at the university, had a 4.0 GPA, was involved in sports, had a good social life, had a lot of friends, went to a lot of parties. He also told me that his father was in prison for selling drugs. He had never known his father. He never even met his father. When he told me that, I was so sad for the young man. He was raised by a mother and his stepfather, had little to do with Christ and the church. But this young man said that he had discovered Jesus Christ through a friend who introduced him to Christ. Not dissimilar to the way the disciple Andrew introduced his own brother Peter to Christ. But he said to me that morning in my office that all the 4.0s in the world, all the sports in the world, all the parties in the world, couldn't hold a candle to the fulfillment that he discovered in Jesus Christ. You see, the person of Jesus Christ became real for this young man. No longer was there just a season of Christmas that raised religious awareness just once a year, but there was the real birth, the real life, the real death, the real resurrection that changed this young man's life forever. And that's why Christ is the person of the centuries. Because he has changed enough lives to give courage and hope to many who continue to fight Ebola, to many people who live in dangerous lands trying to reduce poverty and suffering, to many who pursue peace in broken relationships and in fractured regions of the world, to many who step in for neglected children and youth, to many who respond to the call to heal the sick, to comfort the afflicted, to visit those in prison, to stand and serve food right next door at our recreation center and in inner-city rescue missions across the country, to build homes to the poor, to present cheerful hearts and good spirits to the lonely and to the forgotten. The person of history, Jesus Christ, is the ruler of many hearts. Hearts that do great and wonderful things. Hearts that make the spirit of Christmas alive every day. Just the other night, Jennifer and I watched a special program on television called Christmas in Norway, featuring the St. Olaf College Choir from Northfield, Minnesota. They sang their signature piece, Beautiful Savior, which speaks to the majesty of our Savior, the person of the centuries. In closing, let us listen to Catherine Vaughn sing the first and fourth verse of that beautiful